I ended up sleeping with my cousin. You ever get that nagging sense that something's about to go off the rails, but you push through anyway, thinking you can handle whatever's heading your way? That's how it all kicked off for me. Out of the blue, my cousin Megan calls. We weren't exactly best friends growing up. In fact, we often couldn't stand each other. But at the end of the day, family is family, right? So when she rang me up, sounding frantic and on the verge of a breakdown, saying she'd lost her job and had nowhere to stay, I felt I couldn't just ignore her plea for help. So, like any decent person would do, I offered her a place to crash. I figured it would be a temporary arrangement, just long enough for her to get back on her feet, and then she'd be out of my life. My wife, Sarah, had a different perspective on the situation. The moment I mentioned it to her, she flipped out. You really think it's a good idea to bring her into our home? She shot back, arms crossed, giving me that infamous glare she's perfected over the years. I understood her concerns. She had never really been fond of Megan, viewing her as a mess, a parasite who'd take advantage of us for as long as she could. It's just until she finds a job, I said, trying to ease her mind. But calming Sarah is like trying to tame a wild beast. Her volume escalated. She's gonna ruin everything. You know how she is. But I stood my ground, insisting that family supports one another and that I couldn't just leave her out on the streets. Ultimately, after a lot of shouting and slamming doors, Sarah stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me in the living room, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. A few days later, Megan arrived with a couple of suitcases, wearing that tired expression. I'll admit, it felt rewarding to help her out. She had nowhere else to turn, and regardless of our past, she was still family. The first few days passed without much incident. Megan mostly kept to herself, pitched in with chores, and didn't intrude. She even started helping out with cooking and cleaning, which, honestly, exceeded my expectations. But then Sarah began to act differently. At first, it was subtle. She'd come home from work, see me and Megan joking in the kitchen, and then suddenly turn passive-aggressive. Must be nice to just lounge around and laugh all day while the rest of us are stuck working. Comments like that at first seemed insignificant. I thought she was just adjusting to the new situation. But the remarks didn't fade. They sharpened over time. It didn't help that Megan was genuinely easing our burdens around the house. It felt like she was striving to prove herself, trying to atone for crashing on our couch. And that seemed to gnaw at Sarah even more. Every time I complimented Megan on dinner or praised her for folding laundry, Sarah would twist it into something ugly. "Wow, looks like you've got a new housewife," she'd remark, dripping with sarcasm. Defending Megan only fueled the fire. Our arguments escalated. A lot. They were different from our usual disagreements. I'm talking about screaming matches that had our neighbors probably calling the cops, with Sarah hurling accusations left and right, claiming I was playing house with Megan and that I was becoming too close to her. And Megan? She would just sit in the other room, likely eavesdropping, and then the next day act like everything was perfectly normal. The tension was like a heavy fog draped over our house. I'd walk in from work and feel it hit me the moment I stepped through the door. Sarah would be in the living room, glaring at me, as if she were just waiting for me to screw up. And Megan? She'd be trying to be helpful, suggesting, maybe I should just leave, but I'd insist she stay because the thought of kicking her out felt wrong. Before long, Sarah's jealousy morphed into full-blown paranoia. Every little thing set her off. If I spent too long in the same room as Megan, she'd explode. One night, after dinner, Sarah completely lost it. She slammed her plate down, glass shattering everywhere, and yelled, "I bet you wish she was your wife, don't you?" Then she stormed out, leaving me in a daze, surrounded by the mess. I glanced at Megan, who was wide-eyed and speechless. I was at a loss for words. I was stuck between wanting to console my wife and not wanting to betray Megan. And then there was that nagging thought that maybe Sarah was just overreacting, letting her jealousy cloud her judgment. That's when I began to notice other changes in Sarah's behavior. She started coming home later and later from work, claiming she was working late, but it just didn't add up. Sometimes she would walk through the door smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers. And then there were those moments when she'd enter the room, see me with Megan, and roll her eyes as if she couldn't bear to look at me. "Sarah, we really need to talk about this," I said one evening, trying to pry open a conversation, trying to get to the bottom of what was really happening. But she waved me off. "I'm tired, Mike. Can we not do this right now?" And that was that. She would shut down any real dialogue, leaving me questioning everything about my marriage. In those moments, I began to second-guess myself. Had I made a mistake bringing Megan into our lives? Was I overlooking something glaringly obvious? I thought I was just being a decent guy, helping family in need. But suddenly, my entire life felt like it was spiraling out of control. And Sarah, my wife, my partner, the one I was supposed to trust above all else, was becoming someone I hardly recognized. Someone who seemed to loathe me more with each passing day. And that's where it all kicked off, with an unexpected visitor and the unraveling of everything I thought I understood about my marriage. It started with small things, subtle changes that you might notice but dismiss. I kept telling myself I was just overthinking. Sarah began coming home later from work more frequently, always spinning some story about a big project or how she was helping her boss. I wanted to trust her. I genuinely did. But when she walked through the door, her mood was all over the map. One night she'd be tense, barely speaking to me, and the next she'd be excessively cheerful, almost as if she were putting on a show to mask whatever was really going on. I'd find myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my cold dinner, waiting for her to come home, desperately trying to piece together the puzzle of our lives. But every time I attempted to bring it up, she'd brush me off. "I'm just tired, Mike," she'd respond, dismissive. That'll be the end of it. I'd go to bed with more questions than answers, feeling like I was losing my wife to something or someone that was completely hidden from view. The tipping point arrived one night while I was driving home from work. I took an alternate route, cutting through downtown to dodge traffic, and then I saw them, Sarah and some guy, standing outside a fancy restaurant. I recognized him instantly, Ethan, the colleague she'd mentioned before. But they weren't just chatting. They were laughing, leaning in close as if sharing some private joke. I noticed her touch his arm, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I pulled over a block away, just sitting there, staring at them through the rearview mirror. My stomach twisted into knots. It wasn't anything overt. They didn't kiss or hold hands, but there was an intimacy that my gut told me was all wrong. I wanted to jump out of the car and confront them right then and there, but I remained frozen in place. My mind raced, trying to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. Perhaps they really were just colleagues getting along well. But deep down, my instincts screamed otherwise. When she finally came home that night, I casually asked her about it. "So, how's Ethan?" I probed, testing the waters. She shot me that fake innocent look she mastered. "What do you mean?" she replied, her tone flat and indifferent. "I saw you two together," I stated, my voice coming out more accusatory than I intended. And then it came, the act. The feigned surprise, the defensive scoff. "Oh, for God's sake, Mike. We were just grabbing a bite after work. He's just a friend, okay? Don't blow this out of proportion." But here's the kicker. I knew Sarah. I could tell when she was being honest, and when she was lying through her teeth. And that night, it was clear she was lying. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine, and she kept talking in circles. It felt like she was hiding something, and my blood boiled at the thought of being taken for a fool. I didn't push the issue any further that night. Part of me wanted to avoid hearing more lies. I just nodded and let it drop, but it festered inside me. I turned to Megan. She was the only person who might understand the chaos unfolding in our home. One night, after Sarah stormed off to bed in one of her moods, I pulled Megan aside. "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Megan gave me a knowing look, as if she'd been waiting for me to confide in her. "What's going on?" she inquired, her voice soft but filled with concern. I spilled everything, the late nights, the mood swings, and seeing Sarah with Ethan. Megan listened intently, not interrupting or passing judgment. When I finished, she shook her head, looking more furious than surprised. "Something's definitely off," she said firmly. "I mean, who does that? Laughing with another guy while married?" She said it as if she couldn't believe Sarah had the audacity. Then she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper as if we were sharing a secret. "You need to keep tabs on her, Mike. If she's up to something she shouldn't be, you deserve to know." It felt good to have someone in my corner, someone who validated my suspicions. I agreed, and from that moment on, I was on high alert. Every time Sarah's phone buzzed, or she left the room for a call, my heart would race. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was with him, sharing parts of her life that should have been mine. It drove me insane. I began tracking her comings and goings, taking mental notes of everything she said, hoping to uncover some pattern or slip-up that would confirm my worst fears. Before long, the paranoia consumed me. One night, Sarah was supposed to be working late again. Megan was in the living room, absorbed in a book, but she glanced up at me as I paced like a caged animal. "Why don't you just check her phone?" she suggested after a moment. "If she's got nothing to hide, there won't be anything to find." I didn't need much persuading. The phone was sitting right there on the kitchen counter, seemingly innocent. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. My heart raced like a drum in my chest, and I had to remind myself to breathe. It felt like I was crossing a line, breaking some unspoken rule, but at that point, I needed answers. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I scrolled through her messages, trying to maintain my composure. Most of it was mundane, work chatter, texts from friends. But then I saw it, Ethan's name flashing back at me from the screen. My fingers felt like lead as I tapped on the conversation. The most recent message was simple enough. "Let's meet up. Same place as last time." That's when my world seemed to tilt. My head spun, and my grip tightened on the phone. There it was, as clear as day. All the suspicions, the paranoia, the gut feelings, they crystallized in that one message. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But there was the evidence staring me down. I set the phone down, my thoughts racing like a wild stampede. I glanced at Megan, who was watching me intently, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Well," she pressed, sitting up straight. I relayed the shocking discovery, and her reaction was immediate. She shook her head, her voice sharp with anger. "She's a real piece of work, Mike. You deserve way better than this." And I knew she was right. But what on earth was I supposed to do now? I felt like I was teetering on the brink of a cliff, staring into a dark abyss, fully aware that the next move I made could alter everything. After stumbling upon that damning text on Sarah's phone, I couldn't think straight. My head spun, my heart raced as if it were trying to escape my chest. You don't truly comprehend betrayal until it's staring you down in the form of a simple message, something so innocuous. Yet it holds the power to obliterate your entire world. In a haze of confusion, I instinctively turned to Megan. She was in the kitchen, preparing coffee like it was just another ordinary night. But when I walked in, she must have sensed my turmoil because she immediately set the mug down and rushed over. "What happened?" she asked, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with an intensity one had come to recognize. I handed her the phone, pointing to Ethan's message. She read it, her lips pressing into a thin line as her gaze sharpened with understanding. "You see?" I said, my voice wavering between anger and disbelief. "She's meeting him. Tonight." Megan looked up at me, a familiar fire igniting in her eyes. "You know what you need to do?" she said, setting the phone down decisively. "You need to confront her. Make her face what she's doing. No more sneaking around, hoping for honesty. She won't give it to you. Trust me on that." The idea felt absurd, like something out of a twisted drama rather than real life. Yet, at that moment, desperation overwhelmed me. "So what's the plan?" I asked, caught between fear and resolve. Without missing a beat, Megan replied, "We're going to the bar." She's expecting to meet him tonight, right? Well, we'll be there too. The thought of watching my wife rendezvous with this guy sent my stomach into a knot. I didn't know if I was prepared to witness it, to see her laughing with him, flirting, sharing all the intimate moments that once belonged to us. But a part of me craved the truth, craved the certainty that she was betraying me. I needed to know, even if it shattered me. That night, as Sarah prepared for her so-called girls' night out, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I plopped down on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. She breezed in, her mood irritatingly upbeat, and headed straight for the bathroom to shower and change. I listened to the sound of water running, each drop echoing like a countdown to the inevitable collapse of our relationship. When she finally stepped out, she was a vision, a tight dress that clung to her curves, heels that accentuated her legs, and her hairstyle just the way I loved it. "Going somewhere special?" I asked, making a conscious effort to keep the bitterness from my voice. She flashed that same smile, the one that once made me feel like the luckiest man alive, but now it only made my stomach churn. "Just out with the girls," she chirped, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up for me." As soon as she left, I sprang into action. Megan was ready, and we made our way to the bar mentioned in Ethan's message. It was one of those trendy spots, the kind Sarah never frequented with me. I found myself wondering how many times she had been there with him. We parked a block away and sat in silence for a few moments, our hearts pounding in synchrony. Megan leaned closer, asking, "You ready for this?" "No," I confessed, but I knew there was no turning back now. As we entered the bar, it didn't take long to spot them. There they were, nestled in a booth at the back, cozied up as if they were on a romantic date. My stomach plummeted. She was laughing, her face glowing with joy, a brightness I hadn't seen in months. And Ethan, that scoundrel, was leaning in close, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. Rage boiled inside me, and I wanted nothing more than to storm over there, flip the table, and drag him outside by his collar. But Megan grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "Don't," she murmured. "Just observe." So that's what we did. We found a spot at the bar, just far enough away to remain unseen, but close enough to witness every gut-wrenching moment. As I watched them, I felt my heart shatter repeatedly. She appeared so carefree, so liberated, as if her world didn't include me at all. Did I even cross her mind? Did she feel a single ounce of guilt for what she was doing? Probably not. We watched them order drinks, cocktails, the kind she rarely touched when we were out together. They clinked glasses and toasted to something I couldn't hear. And then she leaned in, grinning that wide, carefree smile that used to belong to me. Ethan placed his hand over hers, fingers grazing her knuckles, and she didn't flinch away. A wave of nausea washed over me. Megan's hand remained on my arm, anchoring me, and I could sense her fury radiating from her. "She doesn't deserve you, Mike," Megan whispered, her voice thick with disgust. "Look at her. Look at how easily she lies to you." Part of me itched to confront them, right then, to expose her in front of everyone. I wanted to scream, to demand how she could betray me like this. But alongside that urge came a suffocating wave of shame. If I made a scene, I'd be painted as the crazy one, not her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd won. So instead, I sat there, helpless, watching my wife flirt with another man, feeling my marriage crumble before my eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan stood up and took Sarah's hand. They made their way toward the exit, and with every step they took, my heart raced. I had no idea what would happen next, but something deep inside me warned that whatever it was would change everything. "Come on," Megan urged, grabbing her jacket. "We need to get out of here before they see us." We left the bar, and as we walked back to the car, I felt like I was navigating through a thick fog, my mind numbed by the shocking scene I had just witnessed. "What now?" I whispered to Megan, my voice barely audible. She turned to me, her eyes steely with resolve. "We make her pay," she stated simply. And as outrageous as it sounded, I found myself believing her. At that moment, revenge felt like the only thing preventing me from completely falling apart. But as we drove home, the gravity of what I had seen began to settle in. My wife, the woman I had built a life with over the years, was off with another man, laughing, touching, and planning behind my back. This wasn't just a fleeting affair. It was calculated and deliberate. The thought cut deeper than I could articulate. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I felt like a hollow version of myself. I knew that things were irrevocably altered. Yet, I didn't know how or when those changes would fully unfold. But one truth was glaringly clear. The woman who walked out of our front door that night was no longer my wife. After we got home, my entire world felt precarious, teetering on the brink of collapse. I couldn't shake the image of Sarah and Ethan, wrapped up in their little bubble of happiness while my life was in ruins. Everything felt like a bad dream, one of those nightmares where you're screaming, but no sound escapes your lips. Yet I was wide awake, grappling with the reality of my crumbling marriage. Megan was waiting for me in the living room. She had gone straight for the liquor cabinet, pouring us both a glass of wine. "Here," she said, handing me one and clinking her glass against mine. "You look like you could use this." She was spot on. I downed half the glass in one go, feeling the warm burn of alcohol slide down my throat. It didn't alleviate the ache in my chest, but it was a welcome distraction from the chaos swirling inside me. I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the wall, the house's silence closing in around me like a suffocating blanket. Megan sat beside me, a little closer than usual, and for a moment, we simply drank in silence. "Talk to me, Mike," she said softly after a while. "You can't keep all this bottled up inside." So I poured it all out. Every twisted detail spilled from my lips. How Sarah's smile transformed when she was with him, the tender touch of their hands, and the way she lit up around Ethan in a way that felt foreign to me. Megan listened intently, nodding along, cursing softly, her expression hardening with each revelation. "You don't deserve this," she said, her voice laced with venom. "She's making a fool out of you. You give her everything, and this is how she repays you? God, I want her to pay for this." The fury in her voice echoed the rage bubbling within me, and I downed the remainder of my wine, feeling the tension within me escalate with each passing second. "Yeah, well, what can I do?" I muttered, staring into my empty glass. "She's off living her secret life while I'm here, stuck. I don't even recognize her anymore." Megan refilled my glass and leaned in closer, her voice low and deliberate. "You know, if Sarah is so worried about me being around you, maybe we should give her something to really fret about." I blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She flashed me a sly smile, one I had never seen before, and it felt like a challenge. "Think about it, Mike. She's out there enjoying herself with Ethan. Maybe it's time she experiences what it's like to be on the other side of this situation. Give her a taste of her own medicine." She took a sip of her wine, locking her gaze onto mine, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I was stunned. The thought of cheating, of stooping to Sarah's level, had never crossed my mind. I wasn't that guy, or at least, I didn't think I was. I can't do that, Megan," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not like her." "Maybe you should be," Megan shot back, her voice fierce. "What's stopping you? She doesn't respect you. She doesn't love you. She's out there, living a double life while you sit here, the good husband, suffering in silence. Screw that, Mike. You deserve to be happy, too." I was at a loss for words. On one hand, the idea of cheating felt like crossing a line I couldn't come back from. But hadn't Sarah already crossed that line? Wasn't she out there right now, with another man, lying to me with every breath she took? I looked at Megan, and for the first time, I saw her not just as my cousin, but as someone who truly understood me, who was willing to stand by my side regardless of the circumstances. The wine began to seep into my system, clouding my judgment, blurring the lines between right and wrong. "You really think it's a good idea?" I asked, my voice softer than before. Megan leaned in closer, and I could smell her perfume mingling with the wine on her breath. "I believe it's the only way to reclaim some control," she whispered. "She doesn't get to treat you like this and walk away unscathed. If she's so worried about us being close, let's give her something real to worry about." It felt like a scene ripped straight from a film, the tension between us palpable as the atmosphere thickened with unspoken words and the gravity of our impending actions. I wanted to refuse, to hold on to my integrity and be the bigger person. But as Megan's hand brushed against mine, her fingers intertwining with my own, something within me shattered. The anger, the betrayal, the desire for revenge surged to the surface, overwhelming every rational thought. And before I realized it, I was kissing her. The kiss began tentatively, almost hesitant, as if we were both gauging the waters. But once we crossed that line, there was no turning back. It quickly morphed into something frantic and desperate, a wild attempt to feel anything other than the agony I'd been shouldering for weeks. For the first time in ages, I felt a spark of life ignite within me. I stopped considering Sarah, Ethan, or the fallout. It was just me and Megan, two broken individuals trying to navigate a world that had spiraled into chaos. We stumbled into the bedroom, shedding our clothes as if they were shackles binding us to our pasts, our hands exploring one another in a frantic search for something real and tangible. I knew this was wrong, that this would alter the course of my life forever, but in that moment I didn't care. All I craved was to escape, to immerse myself in someone who genuinely cared. And Megan was right there, matching my every movement, whispering sweet nothings, assuring me that I deserved to feel desired. When it was over, we lay entwined in the sheets, panting. For a fleeting moment, silence enveloped us, a comfort I hadn't experienced in weeks. But soon, reality crashed in, and I was left questioning what we had just done. The next morning was a blur of panic and dread. I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open, and a wave of terror washed over me. Sarah was home. I shot upright, my heart racing, and there was Megan, still nestled beside me in a state of half-sleep. It was too late to hide. The door swung open, and there stood Sarah, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah's voice sliced through the air like a dagger, and I felt my stomach drop. She stormed into the room, her face twisted in rage. "Are you serious, Mike? In our bed?" I was paralyzed, at a loss for words. How could I explain this? But then again, what was there to explain? She had made her choices, and now I had made mine. But of course, Sarah didn't see it that way. "How could you betray me like this?" she screamed, her voice trembling with indignation. "After everything I've done for you, after all these years, and this is how you repay me?" Megan quickly got out of bed, wrapping the sheets around herself in a futile attempt to calm Sarah. "Maybe you should reflect on your own choices before pointing fingers," she replied, her voice steady but firm. But Sarah wasn't having it. "You're both vile," she spat, tears cascading down her cheeks. Yet those weren't tears of guilt or sorrow. They were tears fueled by rage and betrayal. It was as if she couldn't fathom how someone could dare to betray her, the self-proclaimed queen of hypocrisy. For the first time, I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse for what had transpired. As I stood there, looking at the woman who had dismantled our marriage, who had made me question my self-worth and sanity, I realized that this was the moment everything shifted. There was no going back, no way to repair what had been shattered. And perhaps that was a relief. Sarah's face turned a furious shade of red, her eyes wild as she yelled, "How could you do this? How could you betray me, Mike? To us?" She stood in the doorway, shaking with rage, fists clenched tight as if ready to lash out. At me, at Megan, or even at herself. Her words were laced with venom, bitter and filled with wrath. She launched into a tirade about betrayal, portraying herself as the victim, as if she hadn't been sneaking around with Ethan for who knows how long. "Do you even grasp what you've done?" she hollered, her voice breaking under the strain of her emotions. "You've destroyed everything. My life, our marriage, and you." She turned her contempt toward Megan, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing but a snake. Both of you. I can't believe this." A wave of fury surged within me, a heat that clouded my vision. I was done listening to her twisted narrative, done pretending I was the problem, done with the lies. "You want to talk about betrayal, Sarah?" I shot back, my voice rising to match her intensity. "Don't even think about playing the victim here. I know about Ethan." The room fell silent. Her jaw dropped, and her eyes darted around as if searching for a way out. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. "Cut the act, Sarah," I retorted, stepping closer. "I saw the messages. I saw you two at the bar. Do you really think I'm that naive? You think I don't know what's been happening behind my back?" She froze, her entire body tensing as if bracing for impact. Then she did what she always did. She tried to twist the narrative, to spin the truth until it looked less horrifying. "It's not what you think," she said, her tone shifting to a softer pitch. as if that might change reality. He's just a friend. I never intended for it to go this far. I was lonely, Mike. You were so absorbed in your own world. And I needed someone to confide in. I could hardly believe my ears. After everything she had put me through, Sarah still managed to twist the situation to make herself the victim, as if her choices were somehow my fault. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped me. You know what? I'm done, I said, my voice steady yet resolute. I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I won't. I'm filing for divorce. You and Ethan can have each other, for all I care. Her expression shifted from anger to disbelief, her eyes widening. You're throwing everything away over one mistake, she screamed, incredulous. You'd end our marriage for one stupid choice? It wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was a choice, I replied, feeling lighter with each word I spoke. And you made that choice, over and over again. For the first time, Sarah was left speechless. She stood there, shaking with rage, her chest rising and falling as she glared at me, then at Megan. In a fit of fury, she stormed out of the room, and for what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence, the echoes of her slamming doors and throwing things reverberating throughout the house. After that confrontation, Megan remained quiet. We both understood that we had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and things would never be the same between us. A few days later, Megan packed her things and announced she had found a place to stay. I think it's for the best, she said softly, and I couldn't argue. There was too much history, too much damage. While I didn't regret what had happened between us, I knew we couldn't go back to pretending everything was okay. We tried to maintain a friendly relationship after she left, but an awkwardness hung in the air, like we were tiptoeing around a minefield. Sarah, she was just gone. She moved out a week later, leaving behind a note that said she was staying with a friend until things blew over. But I knew it wasn't about mending fences. She just didn't want to confront the fallout of her actions. The divorce process was messy, as they tend to be. She contested every little detail: the house, the finances, the furniture. At one point, she tried to guilt me into reconsidering, claiming we could work things out and that I was being vindictive for wanting to end our marriage. But I held my ground. It was over, and nothing she could say would change that. Once the dust settled and the paperwork was signed, I found myself standing in the middle of what used to be our home, feeling an odd mix of liberation and emptiness. Everything had shifted. I had no clue what the future held, but I was determined to rebuild, piece by piece. The weeks that followed became a blur of rediscovering myself. I revisited old hobbies I had abandoned: fishing, hiking, even trying to learn how to cook a decent meal. It felt strange at first, trying to fill the void left by Sarah, but gradually, it became easier. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, the ones who had faded into the background while my marriage disintegrated. Megan and I stayed in touch. She was carving out her own path in the world, and while we exchanged messages occasionally, there was never any talk of rekindling what had happened between us. We both recognized it was a mistake, a desperate act in a moment of chaos. Though a part of me still felt a connection to her, we agreed to keep our relationship strictly platonic. There were nights when I'd lie awake in bed, replaying everything in my mind, wondering if I had made the right decisions, questioning if I had lost more than I had gained. But I began to understand that forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about allowing yourself to move forward. So, I forgave Sarah, as much as one can forgive someone who had ripped your heart out. More importantly, I forgave myself for my mistakes, for my actions born out of anger and desperation. Life gradually began to regain its rhythm, albeit in a new way. I established fresh routines and found a new normal. Eventually, I dipped my toes into dating. Nothing serious at first, just casual dinners and awkward conversations over coffee. But then I met someone who didn't make me feel like I had to constantly prove myself. Someone who saw me for who I really was and accepted me without expectations. As our relationship blossomed, I realized that love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about discovering someone who encourages you to grow, who fosters honesty and trust, and who you can trust in return. It took losing Sarah to learn this valuable lesson, But I emerged from the experience stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the simple joys like waking up next to someone who genuinely wanted to be there. Looking back, I have no regrets. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it all led me to where I am today. And perhaps that's what life is truly about. Learning, letting go, and discovering new ways to love and be loved, even after everything has fallen apart.